A young Polish woman, still in her 20s, learned she was about to be killed. She didn't go quietly. She fought back. She scratched him. She looked him in the eyes and screamed, "Why am I supposed to die?" His answer: he had her hands and feet bound. He had her strapped to the trolley that loaded corpses into the crematorium furnace. And then he pushed her in. Alive. The man who gave that order wasn't a nameless bureaucrat hiding behind a desk. He was a hands-on killer. A sadist who carried a truncheon, who drank while he worked, who smiled when people burned. His name was Erich Muhsfeldt, and by the time justice finally caught up with him, the number of people who had passed through his crematoria was beyond imagination. This is his story. And his ending. If you're new here, welcome to Fleek of History, where we dig into the darkest, most overlooked corners of the past and make sure the truth is never buried. Hit subscribe right now and turn on notifications. We put out episodes that most history channels won't touch. You don't want to miss what's coming next. Now, let's get into it. Section 1. The World That Made Him. On the night of July 22nd to 23rd, 1944, soldiers of the Soviet Red Army advanced through the Polish countryside and stumbled upon something that stopped them cold. Majdanek, a sprawling Nazi concentration camp on the outskirts of Lublin, Poland, was still standing, nearly intact. The Germans had fled so fast they hadn't had time to destroy the evidence. The gas chambers were still there. The crematoria were still warm. The warehouses were still packed with the shoes, clothing, and personal belongings of people who no longer existed. Soviet officials immediately invited journalists from around the world to come and see for themselves. For many people in the West, this was the first real look at what the Nazi regime had actually been doing behind closed doors. But Majdanek was only the beginning. 6 months later, on January 27, 1945, Soviet forces liberated Auschwitz, the largest and most lethal killing complex in human history. By conservative estimates, at least 1.1 million people, the overwhelming majority of them Jewish, were murdered there between 1940 and 1945. The true number may be higher. We will never know every name. And walking among the machinery of that death, pulling the levers, stoking the fires, was a man who had dedicated himself completely to the work of killing.
Erich Muhsfeldt.
Section 2. The Man Behind the Crimes. Muhsfeldt was born on February 18, 1913, in Neubrück, then part of the German Empire. There was nothing remarkable about his origins. He finished 8 years of elementary school, became a baker, got married, and had one son. But in 1933, the year Adolf Hitler was appointed Chancellor of Germany, Muhsfeldt joined the SA, the Nazi paramilitary organization known as the Brown Shirts. 4 years later, he transferred to the SS, and by 1939 he had become a full member of the Nazi Party. When the Second World War erupted on September 1, 1939, the machinery of genocide was already being assembled, and Muhsfeldt was ready to be a working part of it. In January 1940, he was assigned to the SS Totenkopf band, the Death's Head units, named for the skull and crossbones insignia on their uniforms. These weren't ordinary soldiers. They were specifically selected and trained to run the concentration camps. Their doctrine was simple and brutal. The prisoners were enemies of the state and should be destroyed. The Death's Head units were responsible for what the Nazis called the final solution, the systematic extermination of Jewish people across Europe. History knows it as the Holocaust. By August of 1940, Muhsfeldt had arrived at Auschwitz, where he served as head of prisoner work commandos. But it was his next assignment that would define his legacy of horror. Section 3. Majdanek, the Killing Machine. In November 1941, Muhsfeldt was transferred to Majdanek concentration camp, where he was placed in charge of the crematorium and the units responsible for disposing of murdered prisoners. Majdanek was an industrial killing site. In the winter of 1941-42, camp authorities began experimenting with Zyklon B gas, the same chemical compound used in delousing, now repurposed to murder human beings in converted shower rooms. Full-scale gas chamber operations began in October 1942 and continued through the end of 1943. Tens of thousands of Jewish prisoners were killed there. Others died from starvation, disease, overwork, or outright execution. Muhsfeldt wasn't just a bureaucrat managing the paperwork. He was deeply, personally involved. Survivors and witnesses described a man who seemed to enjoy his work. He was constantly drunk. He carried a heavy truncheon and used it freely, not for any practical purpose, but simply because he liked to. Once, He noticed a prisoner who had smiled at a passing wagon driver. Muhsfeldt walked over, punched him in the jaw, knocked him down, and kicked him until 3 teeth had been beaten out of the man's skull. On another occasion, he beat a prisoner until the man collapsed, then picked up a shovel handle, forced it into the prisoner's throat, and walked away. He left the man there, pinned to the ground by a piece of wood jammed into his airway, dying slowly, in agony. Muhsfeldt liked to walk around the camp and randomly tell prisoners, "I'm going to get you soon. And I'm warning you, I'm going to burn you alive." For many of those prisoners, it wasn't a threat. It was a promise. Section 4, Operation Harvest Festival, the largest single-day massacre. In late October 1943, Jewish laborists at Majdanek were ordered to dig long trenches. Camp authorities told them the ditches were for air defense purposes. The prisoners knew better. On November 3rd and 4th, 1943, those trenches became graves. Jewish prisoners at Majdanek, along with those at nearby Ponia Tower and Trauniki, were ordered to strip naked and march into the ditches. Once inside, they were shot. Loud music was blasted through loudspeakers to drown out the sound of gunfire and screaming. Approximately 43,000 Jewish men, women, and children were murdered in those 2 days. It was the single largest massacre of Jewish people carried out by German forces during the entire Holocaust. The operation had been ordered personally by Heinrich Himmler, the head of the SS, following several uprisings by Jewish prisoners across the camps. Muhsfeldt was one of the key perpetrators who helped make it happen. Section 5, Auschwitz, the final chapter of his crimes. In May 1944, Muhsfeldt returned to Auschwitz, specifically to Birkenau, the largest subcamp in the complex and the nerve center of the extermination program. He was placed in charge of supervising the crematoria during one of the deadliest phases of the Holocaust, the liquidation of Hungarian Jewry. Between May and July of 1944, over 430,000 Hungarian Jews were deported to Auschwitz. The vast majority were killed within hours of arrival. Hungarian Jewish prisoner and physician Dr. Miklos Nyizli, who was forced to work in the Auschwitz crematorium and later survived to write a harrowing memoir, provided some of the most detailed testimony about Muhsfeldt's behavior. After Muhsfeldt shot 80 prisoners in the back of the head in a single session, he came to Nyizli complaining of high blood pressure. When the doctor asked whether the killings were the cause, Muhsfeldt angrily dismissed the idea. He said it made no difference to him whether he killed 1 person or 80. If his blood pressure was elevated, he said, it was because he'd been drinking too much. On another occasion, something extraordinary and heartbreaking happened. A 16-year-old girl survived a gas chamber. She was found alive. Nyizli personally begged Muhsfeldt to spare her. He pleaded. The request was denied. To ensure the girl did not survive, Muhsfeldt had her shot in the back of the neck. Witnesses at Birkenau also described Muhsfeldt's treatment of Jewish boys from the Warsaw Ghetto who had been separated from their parents. When a group of children panicked and scattered during a roll call, Muhsfeldt had them rounded up and sent directly to the gas chambers. Holocaust survivor Jerzy Lang testified that he had personally watched Muhsfeldt walking toward the crematorium, carrying 2 small Jewish children, 1 in each hand. Moments later, Jerzy heard gunshots from inside. The truck engine parked outside was started to drown out any remaining sounds. Section 6, The End of the War and the Reckoning. In August 1944, Muhsfeldt was transferred to the front lines and participated in fighting in Hungary. After being wounded, he was sent to the Flossenburg concentration camp in April 1945, a brutal facility where the Germans engineered conditions so dehumanizing that prisoners regularly took their own lives. During the camp's evacuation, in the final chaotic days before Germany's surrender, Muhsfeldt was witnessed personally shooting dozens of prisoners who were too weak or too sick to keep walking. For all of this, for the gas chambers, the crematoria, the children, the trenches, the woman pushed alive into the furnace, Muhsfeldt was awarded the War Merit Cross, 2nd class. But the war ended. And the world was watching. Muhsfeldt was captured by Allied forces. In January 1947, a U.S. military tribunal sentenced him to life imprisonment. But Poland wasn't finished with him. He was extradited and retried at the Auschwitz trial, which began on November 24, 1947. During proceedings, this man, who had murdered countless human beings, told a Polish political prisoner during the war, "If you Poles weren't such fools, we wouldn't have had to burn you in the crematoria." The Polish Supreme National Tribunal in Krakow had the final word. Guilty. Crimes against humanity. Death by hanging. On January 24, 1948, Erich Muhsfeldt was executed at Montelupich prison in Krakow. He was 34 years old. His body was donated to medical students at the University of Krakow as anatomical study material. According to Dr. Naisley, Muhsfeldt's wife had been killed in an Allied air raid. His son had been sent to the Eastern Front. The Holocaust did not happen because of one monster. It happened because ordinary people, bakers, fathers, husbands, chose to become instruments of mass murder. Erich Muhsfeldt wasn't born a killer. He chose to be one. Every single day. History demands we remember this. Not to traumatize, but to ensure it is never forgotten, never minimized, and never repeated. If this episode moved you, share it. Someone in your life needs to see this. Drop a comment below and tell us what you think. And if you haven't subscribed to Fleek of History yet, do it now. Every week we bring you the stories that change the world, told straight, with no sugarcoating. We'll see you in the next one.